Winterfell had never felt so cold to Sansa, even though the snow had stopped falling. She stood near the window, looking out at the grey sky, her hands trembling slightly. The letter in her hand was crumpled now. A message from Jon Snow. He was back, he was angry, and he was planning something. She read the line again. "I know what Joffrey did to father. I will not let him walk free." Her breath caught in her throat. Jon had never been like this before. He had always been calm, fair, strong, the kind of brother who listened first and fought only when there was no other choice. But something had changed in him after coming back from the wall, after dying and coming back to life. His eyes had grown darker. He had become colder, quicker to anger. And the moment he found out that King Joffrey had played a part in Ned Stark's death, Jon had made up his mind. He was going to kill Joffrey. Sansa felt her heart racing. Joffrey was cruel. She knew that better than anyone. He had tormented her, humiliated her in front of everyone, and smiled when her father was executed. But he was the king of Westeros now. He had armies. He had Cersei behind him and the throne, and Jon. Jon was just one man, even if he was the king in the north. If Jon tried to kill Joffrey, he would die, and Sansa couldn't let that happen. She turned quickly from the window and rushed out of her chambers. Her mind was racing as fast as her feet. She needed to find a raven. She needed to send a message, something that would reach Jon before he did something stupid. But deep down, she knew this was about more than just stopping a murder. Jon wasn't like the others. He wasn't like Robb, who had died chasing war. He wasn't like the Lannisters, who poisoned and lied and played their games. Jon was still holding on to something honorable, something that didn't fit in the world they lived in. But killing Joffrey, no matter how much the boy deserved it, would stain Jon forever. Sansa had seen what revenge did to people. It made them into monsters. She wrote the message herself, her handwriting shaky but fast. "Jon, please, don't do this. Joffrey will answer for what he did, but not like this. You're not a murderer. You're a Stark. Come home." She sealed it with the direwolf sigil and handed it to the Raven Keeper. Then she waited. 2 days passed. No reply. On the 3rd day the raven came, but it wasn't Jon's handwriting. It was from Arya. "Sansa. Too late. He's already in King's Landing, and he's not alone." Sansa dropped the letter, her breath leaving her body like someone had punched her. Jon had gone, and he had taken men with him. She sat on the bed, her fingers tight around the edge of the blanket. If Jon killed Joffrey, it would be war again. If Jon failed, it would be his head on a spike, just like their father. Tears welled in her eyes, not just out of fear, but out of guilt. Maybe if she had told him earlier what Joffrey had done to her, how much she had already suffered, Jon would have listened. Maybe he would have let go of his anger. But now it was too late. Now all she could do was pray, or go after him, and she was done praying. Sansa had never ridden so hard in her life. The cold wind cut against her cheeks, her fingers frozen around the reins, but she didn't stop. Every mile between her and Jon was a chance to change what was about to happen. She had taken only one guard with her, a quiet northern man named Loren, who owed his life to her mother once. He asked no questions. He just rode. By the time they reached the Riverlands, news had already begun to spread. A small northern force had crossed into the Crownlands. Whispers in the taverns spoke of the White Wolf leading a personal mission. Some said it was a raid. Others claimed he was marching to challenge the throne. Sansa knew the truth. Jon wasn't after power. He was after blood. They stopped at an inn near a frozen brook, trying to find shelter for the horses and themselves. Inside, the fire barely warmed the room, but what Sansa heard next made her blood run colder. A hooded man sat near the hearth, speaking low but loud enough for others to hear. "Saw them myself." Black cloaks, stark banners. They entered King's Landing last night. Slipped in like shadows. The boy King's in danger, and so is anyone standing near him. Sansa felt the world tilt under her feet. He was already inside the city. She didn't wait to eat or rest. She mounted her horse again. "We ride through the night," she told Loren, "Lady Sansa. Your body won't survive another day like this, neither will Jon. She cut him off, her voice sharp and cold. The gates of King's Landing loomed by the next evening, golden and blood-stained by memory. She hid her face beneath a heavy hood, using the old cloak of a kitchen girl to slip through the gates with Lauren. The Lannisters didn't recognize her anymore. Her red hair was gone, replaced with dark braids, and her soft face had hardened over the years. The streets reeked of rot and smoke. King's Landing was dying from the inside, just like the boy sitting on the Iron Throne. Sansa's heart thudded wildly. She knew exactly where Jon would go. The Red Keep. She moved quickly, avoiding guards and slipping through back alleys. Memories slammed into her as she passed the place where her father had died, where she had watched Joffrey smile while her soul cracked into pieces. She could still hear his voice mocking her, still feel the sting of Sir Meryn's hand, but she had survived. Now she had to save Jon from throwing his life away. Inside the Red Keep, chaos had already begun. Screams echoed from the hallways. Guards ran past her, shouting, "The Northmen! They're here!" Sansa ran faster. She found him in the throne room. Jon stood in the middle of it, sword in hand, ghost at his side. His eyes burned with fury. His black cloak was stained with blood, Lannister blood. Around him, 3 of his men held off gold cloaks, blades clashing, and at the foot of the Iron Throne, dragged like a dog, was Joffrey Baratheon, face beaten, lip bleeding. Hair wild and matted, Jon had him, and he was going to kill him. "Jon!" Sansa's voice rang across the hall like thunder. He turned, surprised. Ghost growled low, but Joffrey saw her, and he laughed, spitting blood. "Look who it is." The Horwolf. Jon moved to shut him up, blade raised. Sansa threw herself between them. "Don't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, Jon, don't become like him." He stared at her, hand trembling. "He deserves it." "You know he does. After what he did to father." "To you, I know," she said softly. "But killing him here, like this, you'll lose yourself. You're not an assassin. You're a king. You're a Stark." Jon's jaw clenched. For a moment he looked like he didn't recognize her. Then Joffrey coughed and muttered, "Cowards. Both of you." Ghost snarled. Sansa turned, slowly walking to the Iron Throne. She looked at it, then at Jon. "This throne isn't worth our souls." Jon lowered his sword. The hall was silent except for the sound of soldiers approaching fast. Jon turned to his men. "We leave. Now." Joffrey screamed after them, calling them traitors, bastards, wolves. But they were already gone. As they slipped into the darkness, Sansa glanced at Jon, his face pale and broken. "You saved me," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, I just reminded you who you are." The Queen's screams echoed through the Red Keep like a siren of death. Cersei Lannister stood in the throne room, her golden robe stained with wine, her face red with fury. Guards surrounded her, cleaning up the blood and chaos left behind. But no amount of scrubbing could erase what had happened. Her son had been humiliated, dragged from his seat of power, beaten, mocked by Starks. And worse, they had gotten away. He was right here. She shouted, smashing a goblet against the stone floor. "In my castle, in my throne room. And none of you fools could stop him." No one dared to speak. Even Sir Meryn stayed quiet, his head bowed. Cersei walked to Joffrey, who sat slouched on a chair like a sulking child, face bruised and lips split. His pride was more injured than his body. His eyes, swollen and teary, still burned with hate. "Mother," he hissed, "I want their heads, all of them." Cersei knelt in front of him, cupping his chin. "And you'll have them," she whispered. "I swear it. But first we don't strike in anger. We strike to end them." Joffrey blinked. "You're going to let them get away with this?" "I'm going to make them wish they hadn't," she said coldly. "The North will bleed for this." That same night, Cersei sent 5 ravens, one to every major house still loyal to the crown. She called it an act of treason, claimed that Jon Snow had tried to assassinate the king, and that Sansa Stark had returned to lead the rebellion from within. She offered gold, titles, and land to any lord who would bring her the head of either Stark, dead or alive. By the time morning came, the hunt had begun. Far outside the city, Jon and Sansa rode in silence under the cover of dawn. Their horses moved fast, their faces shadowed beneath dark cloaks. Ghost trailed behind them, his white fur smeared with blood, his red eyes watching every corner. Jon hadn't spoken a word since they left. Sansa kept glancing at him, her heart torn between relief and fear. She had saved him from doing something that would haunt him forever, but in doing so, she had made him a target. "Jon," she finally said, "I'm sorry." He didn't look at her. "You have nothing to be sorry for." "Yes, I do. You were right about Joffrey. About everything. I couldn't lose you too." He sighed, his voice tired. "I wasn't thinking like a king. I was thinking like a brother, like a man with too much pain in his heart." Sansa touched his arm. "You still made the right choice." "No," he said bitterly. "I made the choice that kept him alive. And now we're both traitors." Lauren rode ahead and held up a hand. "Riders," he warned. "Coming fast!" Jon and Sansa ducked behind a crumbling wall, pulling their horses down. They watched as 3 riders passed, one wearing a Lannister banner. "They've already sent word," Jon muttered. "Cersei won't rest until our heads are on spikes." Sansa turned to him, her voice firm. "Then we don't run. We go north. We rally our bannermen. We tell them what happened. This wasn't treason, this was survival." Jon hesitated. "The North is tired of war, but it remembers," she replied. "It always remembers." He met her eyes and nodded, but the road to the north was long, and Cersei was faster than they expected. That night, as they set camp in a thick forest, a single arrow flew past Ghost and landed in the tree beside Jon. A warning. A message, then another came, pinned to a stump. Sansa read it aloud. "Run if you wish, bastard. But I will burn every tree, every village, and every wolf's den to the ground. You laid a hand on my son. You will bleed for it." "Cersei," Jon didn't flinch, but something in him hardened. "She wants a war," he said softly. "Then she'll get one." But Sansa saw it in his eyes, the darkness creeping back. This time it might not be so easy to stop him. The north was colder than usual, and not just because of the weather. Word of Jon Snow's assault on King's Landing had spread like wildfire across Westeros, twisted and poisoned by Cersei's lies. Every raven sent from the crown carried the same message. The bastard of Winterfell is a traitor. He raised his sword against the king, and the north listened, but not all believed. Jon and Sansa finally reached the edges of the north after days of hiding, riding through forgotten paths and sleeping beneath trees. Every village they passed seemed wary. Some people offered food, others just stared. One even spat on the ground when he saw them. But Sansa kept her chin high. It wasn't until they reached a small abandoned outpost, once used by Karstark men, that they dared rest properly. Snow had begun to fall again, soft at first, then thick enough to blanket their tracks. Inside the ruined tower, Jon sat beside the fire, staring at the flames. Ghost lay beside him, alert but calm. Sansa sat across from him, her fingers curled around a mug of hot water. "You haven't said a word in hours." Jon's eyes didn't leave the fire. "There's nothing left to say." "Yes, there is," she replied gently. "You didn't kill Joffrey. You chose not to. That matters, not to Cersei, not to the people who want my head." He looked at her then, and for a second, Sansa didn't recognize the man staring back at her. "I wonder if I should have done it." "At least then it would have meant something," Sansa stood. "If you had, you'd be dead. And worse, you'd have become like her." Before Jon could answer, Ghost stood up, growling low. They weren't alone. A shadow moved in the doorway. Tall, cloaked in black, silent as death. Sansa reached for her knife. Jon grabbed Longclaw, then the figure stepped into the light. "Drop your swords, or try to use them. Either way, I've faced worse." Jon's eyes narrowed. "You," standing before them, older but just as dangerous, was Sandor Clegane, the Hound. "I thought you were dead," Jon muttered. "Lot of people did." The Hound moved closer to the fire, ignoring Ghost's growl. "I've got a message. From someone who thinks you're not as big a fool as you look." "Who?" Sansa asked carefully. He looked at her and his hard face softened slightly. "The one you should have burned the whole city for, Arya." Sansa's heart skipped a beat. She's alive. More than alive, the hound grunted. She's hunting. And not deer. He threw a folded piece of cloth toward John. It landed on the floor with a dull thud. When John picked it up, he felt cold steel wrapped inside. A dagger carved into its handle was a symbol John had seen before, the face of a many-eyed god. She says if you're ready to fight back, the hound said. She'll meet you at the old Godswood near the Dreadfort. 2 nights from now. If you're not there, she'll take matters into her own hands. John looked at the blade. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a promise. She plans to kill Joffrey? He asked. The hound gave a small smirk. She plans to kill everyone with a crown, I think. But you know your sister. When she's set on something, there's no stopping her. Sansa sat back down slowly. This is getting worse. Not worse, John said quietly. Clearer, Sansa frowned. What do you mean? He looked up, eyes burning. Cersei thinks we're the threat. But we weren't. Not truly. Not until now. She stared at him. And now? John stood. Now we become what she fears, Ghost growled in approval. The fire crackled between them, casting wild shadows on the walls. That night, as snow covered the north once more, the wolves began to gather. Jon Snow was no longer running, he was planning, and somewhere deep in the north, Arya Stark waited, dagger ready, heart colder than winter. The war Cersei feared was no longer coming. It had already begun. The Godswood near the old Dreadfort was quiet, untouched by time. Tall weirwood trees rose like pale ghosts under the moonlight, their red leaves rustling with whispers only the old gods could hear. Snow fell lightly, dusting the ground like ash from an ancient fire. Jon arrived first, cloaked in furs, Longclaw strapped to his back. Ghost padded beside him, his white coat nearly blending into the snow. Behind him, Sansa and the hound walked carefully, their breaths visible in the freezing air. All of them were silent. They had no torches, no banners, just shadows and resolve. Sansa's heart beat loudly in her chest as she stepped under the twisted branches. She hadn't been here since she was a child. So much had changed since then. She had changed. They all had. Jon looked around, scanning the clearing. She's not here. She will be, the hound muttered. She's always been better at sneaking than talking. Then, like mist rising from the earth, Arya appeared. No footsteps, no sound. Just a shadow forming into a girl. Sansa gasped. Arya stood at the edge of the clearing, dressed in black leather, her hair pulled back, eyes sharper than any blade she carried. And at her side was the dagger, the cat's paw's blade, the same one she had used to end the Night King. Its Valyrian steel shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Jon stepped forward, eyes wide. Arya, but she didn't move. Do you remember what I told you the last time we stood in a Godswood? She asked softly. Jon hesitated. That we never forget who we are, she nodded. And who we owe. Sansa stepped closer. You're planning to kill Joffrey. Arya looked at her, her expression unreadable. Not just him, Cersei, Sir Meryn, everyone who ever laid a hand on our family, the ones who laughed while father died, the ones who turned their backs on us while we suffered. Sansa's voice cracked. And what then? What happens after? Arya shrugged. I keep killing, Jon's brow furrowed. That's not who you are. Arya turned to him, sharp. Don't tell me who I am. You think letting Joffrey live makes you better? He paraded Sansa in front of crowds like a prize. He spit on father's name. He's a monster. I know that, Jon said. But I also know killing him won't change the past. It'll change the future. The hound stepped forward now, crossing his arms. I told them you were crazier than ever. Arya ignored him. She pulled a piece of parchment from her belt and handed it to Jon. It was a crude map, a layout of the Red Keep. Secret tunnels. Guard rotations. Hidden doors. I've watched them for weeks. Cersei moved Joffrey into the black cells to protect him. He's guarded night and day. Jon looked at the map, then at Arya. And you want us to help? No, she said plainly. I want you to stay out of it. This isn't your kill. It's mine. Sansa grabbed her arm. Arya, listen to yourself. You're not a killer. Arya's eyes flashed. Aren't I? Silence fell. Then softer, Arya added, You both want justice. I'm offering it. Jon looked down at the map again. Every part of him wanted to believe in something better. But he also knew Arya wasn't wrong. Joffrey had escaped justice once. How many more would suffer because of it? Finally, he folded the map and slipped it into his coat. "We help, but we do it our way." Arya raised an eyebrow. "And what way is that?" Sansa answered for him. "We make Joffrey answer. Not just die. We make the world see what he really is." Arya frowned. "A trial." "No," Jon said. "A trap." Arya's eyes lit with interest. The plan began to take shape in the cold shadows of the Godswood. They would return to King's Landing, not as rebels, but as survivors with a message. They would lure Cersei into revealing the truth, show the realm the cruelty of her son, and when the moment came, Arya would be ready. As the fire crackled low, Jon looked at his sisters. "If we do this, we don't get to be innocent." Arya smirked. "We never were." And as dawn broke over the snowy forest, the Stark children stood together again, not as broken pieces, but as blades ready to strike. King's Landing smelled of smoke and fear. Since the night Jon Snow broke into the Red Keep, the city had been crawling with soldiers, spies, and whispers. Cersei's paranoia had turned the capital into a prison where even the rats seemed afraid to breathe too loudly. But tonight, something was different. A royal announcement had gone out across the realm. The northern traitors, Jon Snow and Sansa Stark, will answer for their crimes. The Queen had ordered an open trial in the throne room, promising justice in the sight of the Seven. But everyone knew what it really meant: a show, a display of power, and the Starks were walking straight into it. The gates of King's Landing opened under heavy guard as a wagon rolled through the mud. Inside, Sansa sat straight-backed, chains at her wrists, though they were more for show than for strength. Her eyes were calm, her face pale but steady. Across from her sat Jon, his cloak torn, his sword confiscated. The guards called him the traitor king, spitting the words like poison. But under the surface, something else was at play, because what no one knew, not Cersei, not the guards, not even Joffrey, was that Arya Stark was already inside the Red Keep. She had entered the city days earlier, hidden among the traveling actors of a small Braavosi troupe. Faces were her armor now, lies were her sword, and tonight she was wearing her most dangerous face, that of a timid handmaiden serving the Queen herself. Cersei had no idea the girl pouring her wine and arranging her golden gown was Arya Stark. As Cersei adjusted her crown in the mirror, she spoke without looking up. "They think they'll win sympathy, these wolves. But this is my den, my rules." Arya's voice was small, careful. "And the boy king, your grace? Will he speak?" Cersei smirked. "He'll say what I tell him to say. My son doesn't need truth. He needs control." Arya smiled faintly as she bowed. "Oh, of course, my queen." Inside, her pulse thrummed with silent rage. She thought of her father, of the way Joffrey had smirked while Ned's head fell before the crowd. She thought of Sansa's screams, of Jon's loyalty, of her mother's tears, and she whispered beneath her breath, "Not for long." When the trial began, the throne room was packed. Nobles, soldiers, even commoners had come to see the show. The Iron Throne loomed high, and Joffrey sat upon it, smug and cruel, wearing his arrogance like armor. Cersei stood beside him, regal and unshaken. Sansa was brought forward first. Her chains clinked softly as she walked. "Lady Sansa Stark," Cersei began, her voice smooth as silk. "You are accused of treason, of aiding your bastard brother in an attack upon his grace. How do you plead?" Sansa's gaze rose slowly, meeting the Queen's eyes. "I plead the same as I did years ago," she said quietly. "Innocent," the crowd murmured. Cersei's lips curved. "And yet you were found beside him, fleeing the city like thieves." Sansa's voice didn't waver. "I fled monsters." Joffrey's hand twitched on his armrest. "Watch your tongue!" But Sansa didn't flinch. "I watched my father die on your orders. I watched you humiliate me for years, if that makes me a traitor. Then I was one long before today." Cersei's calm cracked. "Enough!" She turned to the guards. "Bring in the bastard." Jon was dragged forward, his head held high. The hall fell silent. Even the air seemed to pause. Cersei smiled coldly. "You dared draw your sword against the crown. Tell me, Snow, what made you think you could win?" Jon's eyes flicked from her to Joffrey. "I didn't come to win," he said. "I came to end it." Joffrey leaned forward, sneering. "And now you'll end yourself." But before Cersei could speak again, a scream echoed from the balcony. A guard fell to the floor, throat cut. Another collapsed, gasping. Then a third, and in the chaos, Arya dropped from above like a shadow. Her face was bare now, her real face. Her dagger flashed in the torchlight. "Hello, Your Grace," she whispered. Cersei froze. Jon moved like lightning, breaking free from the guards and catching Longclaw as one of Arya's allies tossed it to him from the crowd. Sansa ducked low, pulling a hidden blade from her sleeve, one Arya had given her in secret before they entered the city. The hall erupted into madness. Joffrey screamed, "Kill them!" But before anyone could move, Arya's dagger pressed to Cersei's throat. The Queen's eyes widened. Fear, real fear. For the first time in her life, Jon's voice echoed through the hall. "No more lies. No more crowns. The North remembers." And as the crowd watched, frozen in terror and awe, Arya leaned close to Cersei's ear. "Valar Morghulis." The throne room was chaos. Screams tangled with steel, smoke, and the heavy scent of blood. Nobles fled toward the doors, tripping over each other as gold cloaks tried to decide whether to protect their queen or save themselves. Cersei's breathing came quick and shallow. Arya's dagger pressed against the soft skin beneath her jaw, a single bead of blood tracing down the gold thread of her gown. Jon stood a few steps away, sword drawn, every muscle tense. Sansa had moved to the center of the hall, her voice cutting through the noise. "Enough!" she shouted. "No more blood for a liar's crown." The hall froze for a moment. Joffrey stared at her from the Iron Throne, face twisted with hatred and fear. "You think anyone will follow you?" He spat. "You're nothing! You're the daughter of a traitor." Sansa met his gaze calmly. "And you're the son of a mad queen." That hit harder than any blade. Even the guards flinched. Jon took a step forward, his voice steady. "Joffrey Baratheon, by right you should be dead for your crimes. But you'll live long enough to face the truth." He motioned toward the balcony. From behind the curtains, a figure stepped out, Tyrion Lannister, thin, scarred, and silent. A ripple of shock spread through the hall. Cersei's eyes widened. "You," she hissed. "You're supposed to be rotting in the cells." Tyrion gave a half-smile. "Turns out your guards are easier to bribe than you think." He turned toward the crowd, his voice rising. "Citizens of King's Landing, you've been told that this bastard from the north attacked your king. But the truth is simpler. The Queen has used her son as a shield for her own crimes. She murdered the last hand of the king. She framed her brother. She let the city starve while she filled her cellars with wine." Gasps rippled through the hall. Joffrey stood, red-faced, shrieking, "Lies! All lies!" But Tyrion wasn't finished. "And your father, dear boy, isn't Robert Baratheon. Half the realm knows it. The Queen's secrets are older than your crown." Cersei's fury broke. She tried to speak, but Arya pressed the dagger harder. Jon raised his sword slightly. "Enough! The North doesn't want your throne. We just want justice." For the first time in her life, Cersei's voice shook. "You know nothing of justice. You think you can rule better than me? The realm needs fear, boy, not mercy." Arya's eyes flickered. "And what has fear given you?" Cersei didn't answer. She looked at Joffrey instead, and something inside her cracked. In that tiny moment of weakness, Arya stepped back and sheathed her dagger. "Let her live," Jon said quietly. "Let the world see her fall." But Cersei wasn't done. With a sharp cry, she lunged for a guard's sword and swung it blindly. The blade sliced through the air, missing Arya by inches. Ghost leapt before anyone could react, knocking Cersei backward onto the marble steps. The weapon clattered away. When the Queen hit the floor, the hall fell silent again. Joffrey stood frozen on the Iron Throne, staring down at the chaos below him, at his mother, the blood, the wolves. For the first time, he looked like a frightened boy instead of a king. Sansa walked up the steps slowly until she stood just below the throne. "Step down, Joffrey." He shook his head violently. "I am the king." "No," Jon said, voice low but clear. "You were." Joffrey's eyes darted around the hall, but the gold cloaks had lowered their spears. The nobles who had once cheered for him now looked away. Power, Cersei had always said, lived where men believed it lived. And in that moment, no one believed in him. The boy king slumped back against the Iron Throne, trembling. Jon turned to Tyrion. "Take him. Keep him alive. Let him face judgment from the people he tormented." Tyrion nodded grimly. "The Queen?" Jon looked down at Cersei, lying on the floor, breathing shallowly, blood pooling beneath her. "She's already facing hers." Arya stood over the body, expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, it seemed she might finish it. Then she turned away. "She's not worth it." Sansa looked at her sister, at the girl who'd become something harder than steel, and whispered, "Father would be proud of you." Arya gave a faint smile. "He'd probably tell us to stop making a mess of the throne room." The tension broke with that small joke. But outside the Red Keep, the city was shifting. Word was spreading faster than fire. The Queen had fallen. The boy king deposed. And as bells rang through the night, Jon Snow looked out over the balcony toward the sea of flickering torches below. "The realm will rise or burn after this," he said quietly. Sansa stepped beside him. "Then we rebuild it. Together." Behind them, Arya whispered to the old gods, "One name less." For the first time in years, the throne room stood empty. The Iron Throne loomed alone at the end of the hall, its jagged swords cold under the grey morning light. The blood had been scrubbed from the floor, but the memory of it lingered like smoke. No banners flew, no crown rested. Only silence remained, thick and heavy, in the council chamber below. What was left of the realm's power gathered to decide its fate. Jon Snow stood at the end of the long table, flanked by Sansa, Arya, and Tyrion. Across from them sat lords and ladies from both north and south, some still loyal to the crown, others simply waiting to choose the winning side. Brienne stood silent behind Sansa, her sword at her side. Gendry, now Lord of Storm's End, eyed Arya with quiet awe. Tyrion cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Well, here we are, a kingdom without a king. A city that wants blood and a people who want peace. What do we do now?" No one answered. Finally, Lord Jon Royce leaned forward. "Jon Snow led an assault on the Red Keep. He broke the laws of the realm and saved it," Arya snapped back. "He spared your king's life when he didn't have to. What law covers that?" Sansa nodded. "Jon did what no one else had the courage to do. He exposed the lie. He held back the blade." Another lord muttered, "And now the realm watches." Tyrion looked to Jon. "They want a symbol, something to believe in. You gave them truth, but truth isn't enough. They need a future." Jon's voice was calm but tired. "I don't want the throne." Sansa turned her head sharply. "Jon, I don't," he repeated. "I came here to end one war, not start another. But who else?" Arya asked. "Who would they trust? You bled for them. You died for them. You were ready to give your life for justice." Jon shook his head. "I've done enough killing. I don't want to rule." "Not like this." Sansa stood now, her voice steady. "Then let the North rule itself. Let the South keep its throne, if it wants one. The North will stand alone, free as it once was." Murmurs rose around the table. Lord Royce nodded slowly. "The North has always been different. Perhaps it's time we stop pretending it isn't." Tyrion looked to Jon. "If not you, then who?" Jon didn't speak. He looked at his sisters. One was fire in a steel shell. The other, ice with a mind sharper than any sword. They didn't need him to lead. They already were. Then he said quietly, "Let the realm choose its leaders. Not through blood, but through voice." The lords frowned. "You're suggesting a vote?" "Why not?" Jon asked. "If the people bleed for kings, why shouldn't they have a say in who wears the crown?" It was a strange idea, dangerous, but Tyrion smiled faintly. The bastard always did have strange ideas. The seed was planted, and in that moment, something shifted. The nobles debated, argued, shouted, but by sunset, a fragile decision was made. Cersei would stand trial. Joffrey would be sent to exile in Old Town, stripped of all titles. A council would rule temporarily, and the North would be free. Sansa was named Queen in the North by nightfall. Her people raised their swords to her name, not with fear, but with pride. Arya vanished 2 days later, leaving only a note for Jon. Some names are still out there, and I still have work to do. Don't try to stop me. You never could. Tyrion was offered the role of Hand once more, but he refused. I've done enough damage with power. Let someone else carry the burden this time. As for Jon, he walked out of King's Landing alone, ghost beside him. No throne, no crown, just silence and snow in his veins. He rode north, past the wall, past the broken keeps of the Night's Watch, into the land where no maps dared stretch. Some said he went looking for peace. Others said he was chasing ghosts, but the truth was simpler. He was a Stark, and the North had always been in his blood. In the end, the Iron Throne was melted down, not by dragonfire, but by decision. Piece by piece, the realm reshaped itself, not perfect, not whole, but different, less ruled by fear, and more by memory. And in the North, under falling snow and quiet skies, the wolves ruled once again. The game had ended. The thrones were gone. But the story of the Starks, it had only just begun.